Former WWE superstar who just retired at WrestleMania 35, Dave Batista, has come out and said that AEW is not legit. They're not legitimate competition for WWE. Guys, we're going to dissect the comments that were made. I really can't believe it. We're going to talk about it in today's video here on Destination Pro Wrestling.
You have arrived at your destination.
Welcome back to the channel. My name is Zango. You guys can follow me on Twitter at TangoWithThango. And today we are talking about the comments recently made by Dave Batista in an interview with YouTuber Chris Van Fleet. Now, as you guys know, the four-time WWE World Champion had lots to say about WWE versus AEW. And we're going to talk a lot about these comments. While he does support AEW, he still makes it very clear that they are not legit and they will not be able to compete with WWE. So we're going to dissect some of these comments. I thought it was very interesting. However, before I do break down the comments that Batista made specifically, I have to mention to you guys that I think Batista played this interview very safe. I really think he played it safe. For those who don't know, his first ever comedy movie, Stuber, is coming out to theaters very soon. It's being released. And honestly, a lot of people felt like this interview was essentially done not only to bring interest to that, which is why some of these comments may have been made, but of course, we have to keep in mind that Batista does have a little bit of a bias towards WWE. He's been very loyal to the company, despite coming out and having some issues creatively with the company. He is still biased towards the company. Obviously, you know, he said a lot of great things about his friendship with Triple H and, of course, Vince McMahon. So we have to be real. We have to acknowledge these things prior to us breaking down the comments. And honestly, kind of going back to the interview being safe, we just have to really know that, you know, he doesn't say things in this interview that is necessarily bad about AEW, but it's very clear that with him playing it safe, he's also not trying to offend WWE. So he's playing very neutral in this interview. I can understand why people have taken to social media to say some of the things that I've read. And perhaps, you know, his bias to WWE is essentially the reason for this interview being the way it was. Now, I don't have a problem with his biasness, but I'll give you guys my opinions on some of his comments. I think we should just break it down. What did Batista say about AEW? Well, he simply states, I don't see it as legitimate competition. I see it as a competition, which is great because there should always be competition. But until they produce one of their own major stars and until they have a production that's as big as WWE, until they start, I mean, WWE's got the next 3 generations of superstars because they've got NXT camps all over the world now. They are so far ahead of the game that I don't see any real competition. Not even close. I believe that competition is always good, especially in the sports entertainment industry. Okay, I really support them. Very interesting words coming from Batista. Obviously, you know, again, we're probably going to talk about his bias towards WWE a lot in this video, but there's a lot of things that we have to consider here. In a way, he's basically saying AEW can never beat WWE, but he's also saying that he supports the product, which if you're in the pro wrestling world and you want the business to thrive, you should always support any product. Clearly, that's probably one of the most important things when it comes down to the pro wrestling world, especially because it is no longer captivating the mainstream audience as much as it used to back in the early 90s, late 90s, and early 2000s. So let's kind of start off with the premise where he says WWE, where he says until they produce one of their own major stars, until they have production as big as WWE. So there's 2 things that we have to consider. AEW has some very large stars on their show, right? In their roster, Kenny Omega, Jon Moxley, Chris Jericho. Those are the 3 biggest. And then obviously you have Cody and you have the Young Bucks and Hangman Page. Well, when it comes to U.S. television, here in the United States, when it comes to television, a lot of these people really aren't known. So I'm not saying that AEW doesn't, you know, I'm not going to give AEW for building these guys up. Obviously, these guys are a big reason as to why AEW is starting off hot. But most importantly, when it comes to building stars, that doesn't happen overnight. So that is one thing that you guys have to understand. WWE doesn't create stars overnight. It's a process. They have a performance center. They are working on developing these stars. And I think that is one of the issues that I have here. It's a brand new company. The guys that they have may not be as popular in the United States in terms of U.S. television wrestling shows. So obviously, aside from Chris Jericho being on WWE television, the Young Bucks had a very forgettable run on TNA. Kenny Omega was a New Japan guy. Cody was a WWE guy. I kind of get where he's going with this, but ultimately AEW has a chance to make these guys a big part of the show, especially a guy like Hangman Page, who pretty much I think is the poster boy for AEW. I think it's going to be very similar to the Daniel Bryan situation, where a whole bunch of fans are eventually going to want to see you as a world champion. I've said this multiple times. I've said this numerous times, that Hangman Page shouldn't be the first world champion, because in order to properly build him up as a star, having him chase Chris Jericho would make the most sense in my opinion. So I kind of have a little bit of issues with that. But what really got me here was the fact that he was talking about WWE's next 3 generations of superstars because they got NXT camps all over the world. Well, first, let's be clear. NXT is only in the UK and in Florida, okay? And I'm not knocking his comment here because I understand with what he's getting at. Obviously, WWE is doing tryouts everywhere. They're in China. They're in the Middle East. They're trying to bring superstars into the company. However, there's a large percentage of people in the Performance Center who have yet to debut on TV, and many of these people have not even had any experience training for pro wrestling. So obviously that's what they're working on right now. Again, you can't build a star overnight, so I totally understand that, NXT being all over the world has its benefits, but it takes a very long time for WWE to do that. In fact, if we talk about some of the comments recently made about John Cena, he's basically come out recently and said WWE's never going to have a top guy. Like John Cena's like the last of it. And basically what he's getting at is you need multiple people to be the top guy. And I think AEW, starting off the bat, they're already doing it. And now the good thing for AEW is they have signed some people onto their roster that they could eventually hope to make big stars. Whether that's Sammy Guevara, whether that's Kip Sabian, whether that's the Best Friends. I mean, there's so many people on this roster. Obviously, Neville is no longer in WWE. He's on the AEW roster. Obviously, there's an opportunity for them to do that. With that being said, NXT has only been around for a couple years. It's still... At this point, it's more of a third brand than developmental. And I get what Batista is saying here, but we also have to keep in mind NXT is probably the hottest product on WWE television right now. So that's the huge issue that I have here. While WWE is developing stars, they are also losing stars. They're also having pretty uninteresting TV on Mondays and Tuesdays, which is a real shame because obviously, they have some major potential there. But we have to keep that in mind when it comes to WWE. I'm not knocking WWE. I do think, in a sense, Batista is right here. Like, AEW is not going to beat WWE just yet, but this will be a very, very big change in the pro wrestling world that is needed. I truly believe that AEW and their influence is going to help make wrestling cool again to the mainstream audience. And because WWE's product is a little bit more watered down, yes, they can create more stars, but what good is creating stars if you can't keep them happy? Sasha Banks, for example. We talked about the Sasha Banks on the previous video in regards to her issues with WWE, but she's not the only person that has expressed uninterest in staying with WWE. In fact, Dave Meltzer even came out recently saying there has been numbers of people, like high numbers of people, who have requested releases from WWE, and people have, basically contacted AEW because they eventually want to leave WWE. So the interest for a common WWE star at this point, if they're not being utilized, more than likely you're going to see them in AEW, and that's if AEW will take them. Again, part of Tony Khan's initial, response to building AEW is to not sign a whole bunch of WWE guys. So of course, this brings up that conversation. What good is building superstars in WWE if you don't do anything with them? I don't think Batista understands the real competitive atmosphere that is here in pro wrestling. I don't think he understands that AEW is generating tons of talk, tons of, engagement with the audience. You guys could hate on AEW if you want. You could hate on WWE if you want, but it's very clear AEW has people's interest. And right now, WWE is losing people's interest. And WWE has always been the blueprint of what's successful in pro wrestling. And unfortunately, people and consumers in general are starting to realize that's not what it is. So ultimately, is Batista right or wrong? I want to know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Don't forget, you could become a DPW champion. And don't forget to click that bell. Get notified when the latest pro wrestling news gets dropped here on Destination Pro Wrestling. My name is Ango, and I'll see you guys next time.